Okay, and then to everyone on Zoom, just for disclosure purposes, because this is a public meeting, it is subject to sunshine laws and open records, so that's why I record them. And it's helpful for anyone that is unable to attend the meeting or the Zoom, but would like to see the results of it. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Let's push this back a bit. Just ruin their tablecloth. Okay, hello everyone, good evening, good evening. Hi. Thank you all for joining tonight. Ameren, if y'all want to come up here with me, that's perfectly, I'll absolutely spread out if left to my own devices, so please come on up and curtail. So thank you everyone for coming out tonight. You all should be the residents that live directly adjacent or in the general vicinity of the Loughborough and Mackland properties. And have clearly a vested interest in this upcoming substation or the substation plans. So I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight to come to this forum. To everyone on Zoom, thank you for joining remotely. I'm going to work to make sure that you can also see all the documents and whatnot. And I'm happy to make anything available afterwards if there's any follow-ups or any other questions. I am Alderman Stevens of the 12th Ward, elected this past April. So it's nice to meet you all and see some of you all again. My apologies to people such as Bill, whose door I knocked on 3 or 4 times. He was probably well sick of me by the time the election rolled around. But, and likewise, I want to extend the apologies from the 13th Ward Alderwoman, who was going to be here tonight, but got delayed at the last minute, Ann Schweitzer. And she would like everyone to know that there is an upcoming Carondelet Park cleanup Wednesday, July 7th from 4 to 6 p.m. and they're meeting at the Boathouse. So if anyone would like to assist in the Carondelet Park cleanup, trash pickup, she would love to have you. And we're planning some things for Wilmore too. So keep an eye out. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our Ameren reps, or rather have the Ameren reps introduce themselves, and we can get the conversation going about the upcoming substation and the proposed location design thereof. Oh, I'm sorry. And being sure to speak up.
Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Patrick Brown. I'm with Ameren Missouri, Community Development Manager, which is just a fancy way to say that I'm a government affairs professional. And so any of the work that goes on between the city of St. Louis and Ameren Missouri, I'm the point of contact and manager of that. So that's how I was introduced to Alderman Stevens. And prior to that, Alderwoman Grass, and got brought into the project once we started applying for permits for demolition and that sort of thing. So I'm really here as kind of a relationships person and I would say higher level project manager because the actual project managers are here, and I will introduce them first with Tony.
Hi, my name's Tony Bonsignori, and I'm the project manager for the substation that we're going to upgrade at Loughborough and Mackland. And this is my associate, Justin Miller. So the reason why we wanted to come and meet with the neighborhood was that I'm going to kind of read some of this stuff to you just because I put a lot of thought into it. But Ameren would like to present the current plans to upgrade the substation at 6615 Mackland Avenue, known to Ameren as the Loughborough substation, and receive feedback from the neighborhood. So we kind of want to present what our plans are, what our initial plans were, and then here's some feedback, what you guys think of it. You know, we want to hear what you have to say and address it as best we can. So the history behind the Loughborough substation is that it feeds circuits to all the homes and businesses for several blocks around it. The equipment at the substation is over 60 years old, and it's at the end of its useful life and has manual equipment. In addition, the lines that supply the substation and many of the circuits that provide power to the neighborhood exit the substation and run underground along Mackland Avenue. This can present problems if damage occurs to the cables along this route. Ameren purchased the 3 properties adjacent to the existing substation, which is 5207, 5211, and 5215 Loughborough, in order to upgrade the substation. So our plan initially, our plan is to replace the 2 existing units. So unit is basically a transformer and a switchgear that feeds the neighborhood, the circuits in the neighborhood. So we're going to replace new. Type this right. Replace the two transformers with low noise transformers, so there should be less hum. The new switchgear, two new switchgear to manage the power at the that supplies the substation, and that can either supply it can supply either unit from either of the two sources. So there's two sources that come into the substation. The idea is if one drops out, the other one will pick up. The new switchgear will manage that, and also it's automated and it's remotely operated. So that should cut down on outage durations, and because you don't have trucks that have to roll in order to come switch the equipment. So then also two new switchgear that manage the circuits that feed out to the neighborhood. And they can share the power demand of the neighborhood, and they are also automated and remotely operated. So that gives the same benefit. So also we plan to reroute incoming power and feeders to the neighborhood to minimize the impact to customers if damage occurs to underground cables. So like I mentioned before, many of the cables run along Macklin Avenue. So if we have damage in that one spot, then it could cause more widespread outage. So part of our project is to spread that out such that there's less cables in one particular area.
Which is important because just recently the neighborhood experienced a fairly significant outage. And so this sort of upgrade, we're trying to prevent that happening.
So that was one of the underground cables?
I believe that was the case, yes. But I know there's an email on it confirming or denying that. But yeah, my understanding, and I asked for clarity, but my understanding was it was an underground cable that was.
Right. So Ameren's original plan included demolitions of the three buildings adjacent to the property, adjacent to the existing substation along Loughborough. And once Ameren understood that the demolition was not an option acceptable to the neighborhood, or that was supported by city ordinances, different plans were developed. So this is the part I don't need don't need the script anymore. So
do the Vanna White Act and
right.
hand out the
So yeah, we're going to pass out some handouts, but essentially, what's that? Yeah, all of that's the same. So what I have, what they're passing out is it shows a footprint of what we expect the substation to look like, and what we're planning to do rather than taking over all of those properties, which Ameren owns those now, but rather than demolishing the buildings, we're just going to, you know what, maybe I'll just wait until they get that.
Yeah. Mr. Bonson,
Yeah.
With the power outage, there were two power outages, right, recently, 2 weeks ago. One from apparently an underground cable, and then one from when they brought the system back online and it tripped a breaker.
Okay.
Is what I was told.
So I
on
would
site.
expect that would be a smaller, it was a second outage, but fewer people would probably be impacted.
Yes, fewer people were impacted. It was still pretty widespread. But the reason that it took so long to correct was because it was a manual correction. Luckily, it was overnight. This would, thank you. This would mitigate the need to
have that person roll out to. Yeah,
okay.
That's true.
And it would, but it ultimately wouldn't have been an issue to begin with, correct? Because even if the one transformer went offline because it tripped a breaker or whatever, the other new transformer that makes up the substation would be able to carry the dual load.
It depends how the fault occurs, but
Okay.
the design tries to minimize the number of customers impacted.
Okay.
So I guess long story short, we're almost doubling capacity for the neighborhood with this new rebuild, because both of these transformers would be designed to carry the load in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So essentially what these show is the footprint, and all three of them show exactly the same footprint.
Okay.
The idea is that rather than taking all of the three properties, we would just take a portion of the backyard of the properties to expand into. And that would allow us to install the new equipment before all of the old equipment is removed. And the importance of that is we want to keep power onto the neighborhood, right? So we want to build this, like most of the new equipment, and then we transfer all the circuits onto the new equipment and tear out the last of the old equipment and install the new one there. So there's a lot going on there, but the idea is this would be the footprint. So there's lots of discussion there. We initially had gone to the city to say we would like to demolish these 3 buildings to make room for our substation, and they said, yeah, you can't really do that because you have to fit criteria. The buildings have to be in bad shape. They have to be they have to bring down the property of the neighborhood and bring down the value of the neighborhood. And it really, all the criteria were similar to that, and those buildings just didn't meet the criteria. So I said, you know, we don't want you to tear those down.
And it can't be because we've made them not.
Right.
Which we agree, right? Like, I think maybe we should back up a bit and apologize.
Bringing property values down, and I'm trying to sell a house next to it, and they're looking for comps. Please tell me that that's not going to bring value to my property.
I'm not a real estate professional, so I won't comment on that. But my point is, to Tony's point, these buildings needed to be a hazard to public safety.
They are now. But when were they last looked at? That's my point. Because originally, no, they weren't, but they are now.
Okay, but we're trying to
Right.
look past that right now with it. The problem I have is that the 3 buildings, you're taking 8 units, okay? Which is at least 8 vehicles. And there's nowhere to park. Okay? You say that one right here, but you're taking a garage and that down. And these units are already limited on parking because previous alderman and I went around and we took some of the parking from the front because we needed visibility because that intersection is so hazardous as far as accidents and such. We needed clear visibility. So we took a half car length at least from along Lock Road, Macklin, and Mullen Hall.
Who's eager to live in those buildings?
I had somebody interested in the buildings, but not if they're gonna lose all that property.
So I guess to that question, our plan would be to rebuild the substation as you see it, providing the appropriate approvals would be received, and then we would sell them to the private market, right? And with the idea that someone would convert them back into residential rental housing. But that is, you know, Ameren would not keep the buildings, and Ameren would not rehab the buildings. We would sell them to a private buyer.
But it's been reevaluated in the state of the buildings. I mean, at this point, I'm not going to knock them down. Do something. Because nobody's going to live in them the way they are.
Yeah, no, they're not habitable now,
No.
but they would be once restored.
Yeah, we would have to restore.
So the plan would be to, as it's here, would be to kind of bifurcate that backyard in order to, because the plan was to demolish 3 buildings, so we had enough room to build a substation. We cannot do that, but we still need to rebuild the substation, so we need to find the space somehow. So the proposal is to use a portion of the back half, which is a garage at this point, and part of a backyard to.
Are they demolished one, make some parking space?
No,
Parking.
no. So the city cultural division, the cultural and historic preservation district and whatnot, are disallowing the properties to be torn down. So that strip of Loughborough is under is considered a historic preservation area. Princeton Heights is somewhat unique in that it's a bit of a patchwork when it comes to which blocks are under historic preservation districts and so on and so forth. And this just so happens to be under that. And what that is that the charm of the architecture is considered to have enough of an impact on the city's identity and the identity of the ward, the identity of the neighborhood, that the city will disallow any substantial exterior changes that wouldn't fit within that image, that look. There's another house on a neighboring street, not necessarily near this location, but within the neighborhood, that painted the brick white. So that is another process that we're looking at. You know, did they have the clearance to do that, so on and so forth. So that added to quite a bit of the confusion, and that this other division of the city stepped in and said, absolutely not.
I understand that, and I totally get it, but the shape that they're in now, which one of them are gonna come with next to it, the dilapidated building? Like, I understand the architectural, but the point of the matter is where they already stand. And I would love for one of them to come live next to it, like, and see how their taste change. It's not gonna be, I mean, so it's better to have a dilapidated, vacant, messed up building because of the value versus something that's actually gonna be profitable and clean.
So the current plan, and Ameren, correct me if I'm wrong, is to, sorry, I'm trying to host this meeting also.
I don't understand the, you know, they're so worried about the historical value, I get it, but I'm more worried about having vacant, dilapidated buildings.
So the current plan is to sell the building so that they can be rehabilitated and rehabilitated.
Someone's gonna want that. Exactly. Yeah, it should be looking at it.
I mean, the fact is they're already looking at it, right? Because the substation's behind. It's closer, true, it is closer. But it's gonna be, it's newer equipment, so it's a little less antiquated looking and whatever. It's also gonna be a lot quieter because it's modernized, so.
But currently now there's a street here, so if someone's playing in their backyard here, they have a street. This is property, if someone's playing in the backyard, they literally have a fence where, I just don't know how marketable that would be. Well, are you kidding me? The power's been shut off, so is the water. It's been gone through the St. Louis weather. They're not marketable now anyway.
Not in their current state, but they'll have to be restored
If it was
before.
updated, I'm sure.
Sure.
How long will the sell process? When will the selling process begin?
Well,
It's-
once
it
we have
depends, yeah.
approval, you know,
Yeah.
so for us, the first step was to meet with you to determine what do we need to do to make this an acceptable option moving forward, or what are better alternative options to make this go forward. So that's our first step, is to get with you to kind of finalize a plan. Here's what we really want to move forward with, and then we start the approval process with the city. So
Are you planning on fixing up those houses, putting windows back in and all that? Or you're selling them as is and someone else would have, whoever buys it would have to fix it up?
So that's something that we would have to work out with whoever wants to purchase the property. You know, if you think about when you sell your own home, you have an option. If the buyer's inspector wants to say, okay, you need to fix A, B, and C, you can either decide to fix A, B, and C, or provide cash back, or, you know, we can fix it, or they can hire a contractor and pay the contractor. So there's lots of different possibilities there. So that the bottom line is, before the properties could be rented out, they would have to be restored. And so we would have to work that out.
Now, is the power from this power station actually the power for Schollmeyer and Gresham and Bonita? Or is that, I had heard that this power station supplied electricity for like Shrewsbury or Webster Groves, and it
No.
was not in the direct area.
Yeah, no, these distribution substations, I have this tendency to get real technical, so I'm gonna say it in a little bit different way. So we bring in higher voltage because you run that over transmission line at higher voltage because it's more efficient. So you step it down to more neighborhood voltages, which is 4,000 volts in this case. Bring it down to that level, but you can't really push electricity at that lower voltage very far. So it absolutely, it supplies the neighborhood around several blocks.
Could it be safe to say that the outage that we had 2 weeks ago is an area that the substation covers?
Mhm.
You know, I mean,
It was because the
Right.
substation flipped a breaker as a safety measure, which speaks to the safety engineering of the substation. But I think I may have confused you inadvertently, ma'am. The power line that caused the initial disruption in service was a feeder line from the Shrewsbury station, from the Shrewsbury power station. Oh gosh,
That's the high
say that 5 times fast. So the power station, it doesn't generate the power at Shrewsbury, does it? It's just
No.
like a much larger
It's
transformer.
another-
It's a different substation.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a much larger substation, huge substation feeding power to our smaller substation, and that's where the disruption was.
Crossing the bowling alley.
Somebody from Ameren said, source another area.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so the power was coming from Shrewsbury to our substation, and that connection, that feeder line, is what caused the original disruption. And then, for some reason, when it was brought back online for those few hours, as I understand, something caused a safety breaker to flip, or I don't know if a transformer, if it actually like breaks or whatnot.
Yeah.
But a safety feature was
It's just like a breaker in your house,
okay.
except it's 4,000 volts. So
Uh,
So when you have a fault, a short circuit or something on the line, it trips just like a breaker in your house, only bigger.
And so the current state is that, like in your house, you got to go down to the basement, flip it. Well, with the new automated sort of switching, we don't need to go in the basement. It does it all automatically.
Right.
All things working well. It can't. The current infrastructure does not do that.
Were other sites considered for the new substation?
Yeah, actually several were. We looked, well, we've kind of developed it over time. So we looked at one site, there's a bank over at, well.
it's just right there, yeah.
Right across the street.
Mhm.
And they're getting ready to move out if they haven't already, and we considered their parking lot. We never really approached that seller. That was actually the closest one, and that was like 0.2 of a mile away. We considered a site down on Gravois that's essentially surrounded by cemetery. It was the old caretaker's property. We considered that. That's about a half a mile away. And then we considered several, but the problem is the farther you get away from where the circuits are, the more expensive it is to bring that power over, and less efficient will be because you have to take the low voltage circuits and run them back to the area. So we talked with the folks that maintain this area, and they said we would really rather keep it at this location because of the expense of moving all those cables.
And because
and really-
proximity,
I'm sorry,
and because they have to take into account proximity as well, correct?
proximity
The farther away,
to the load.
the more
to
stops
the
you have to put
circuits.
in, or not the stops, but the more bridges you have to gap, I guess, or gaps you have to bridge.
Right, well, yeah, well, that's the other thing, you bring up the bridge, 2 of the sites were on the other side of the river Pear, and crossing a bridge, crossing a river, that's a significant safety issue there as well. So that's why we just keep coming back to this site, so. that's-
How did Ameren get permission to buy buildings and how they're saying they, I don't understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. I asked it several times. I don't have a good answer to it. So when I took over the project, I don't want to push responsibility off myself. When I took over the project, the last property, the last property had not yet been bought, and yeah, so they bought the, I don't know.
This was years in the
We should have
making, right?
never,
So
we should have never bought the property without the permission to build,
This
tear down
initial,
the buildings and build the substation.
this initial property and project was discussed with Alderman Arnold's, and so that's how long it's been that this has been in the works.
How much did they pay for this property?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have
How
that.
much did we bring off?
You know, I know this has been a long time in the works because originally Ameren wanted to buy the first 5 houses on Shomar and the buildings over on Lockboro. And nobody on Shomar would sell their home. And it's a darn good thing they did, because now if you're in a problem that you can't even tear down the buildings or anything,
Right.
then these homes would all be vacant too.
Now, is that the strip of Schollmeyer from Macklin to Loughborough?
Yeah.
That-
yes,
okay,
and it's-
okay.
Yeah, Schomeier's the next
That
street.
little,
along.
okay,
They
okay,
wanted to buy those 5 houses.
okay.
right behind the
So
substation.
the other.
Yeah, so much closer to where the current one is. Right.
I have a simple question. If we're using updated material systems and we're supplying the same number of households, we're not increasing population of our housing. And we're still using modern, why would you need more space? I would think it'd be less space.
Right, so currently the high voltage comes in high, geographically high, and the switching is above ground. It's, I don't know, 10, 12 feet in the air. That equipment and that style of technology is outdated, and it's not nearly as safe for the operators to switch if they do have to come out to do it. And plus the automated, yeah, it's not as safe. So that's why we're putting it in the enclosure on the ground. So those two that are essentially in the backyards of the 3 houses, those are the high voltage switching.
And they're not currently on the site.
Correct.
So,
What if
so
they
we're
have
expanding
this-
the site to add those two.
I'm sorry.
Would it make the price of the like down? Looking for an angle.
So I don't, I can't promise you that, but here's how we justify the project. If we have automated equipment that, and the term that they use on the commercials is self-healing, and the equipment doesn't self-heal, but the overall system self-heals. So if you have a fall, say, a squirrel jumps between 2 and doesn't quite make it, and he creates a fall. Today, that circuit's out.
Right.
And somebody comes and assesses the situation, and if it's safe, they turn it back on. Well, the way the automated system works is that if that squirrel does what he does, well, when he shorts out and meets his rapid end, he clears the line. And so the equipment, after some number of seconds, it recloses for itself. It does it on its own.
No,
Well, there's an outage, but it's like 5 seconds,
Yeah.
not
A little
5 hours,
A blip.
right?
So
And
it's
so-
updated and less manpower, yeah, that's definitely.
Right.
It certainly makes it more efficient. I mean, we can tell you in the inverse, if we had to move the substation and there's added expense, it certainly doesn't make the electric any cheaper.
Right.
So if this isn't approved, people are not happy with it, what are you gonna do?
Well, I'm begging for options. I'm begging for suggestions.
This is the best.
So maybe what we ought to do is look at some of the other options in there, because I think the last one, there's a wall around that are adjacent to the substation, that are just
No, it's okay.
adjacent to the neighboring, homes. And so it's just depicting a wall. One of our options looks a lot like this. It's a concrete prefab sections that go in. They look kind of like the ones that you see along the highway, but they're not exactly the same. They just kind of look like them. So that's one of the options. What I saw today, and I didn't bring copies of pictures of that, is that they'll actually paint that concrete wall. And so one of the thoughts I had today, and unfortunately it was late and I couldn't really add it to the renderings here, is, and this is swimming upstream and I'm kind of catching him and Alderman Stevens off, but the thought I had today is maybe we reintroduce the idea of demolishing the buildings and putting up one of these walls, and we can match the color of the surrounding buildings. Maybe that's an option.
They have one over towards Walker or Ward, and they actually have like a faux brick exterior, and to be honest with you, it's not that bad. I've seen houses that are worse.
Right, so I saw,
If you have one in New City, that looks like a home.
Yeah.
right, yeah, well, and I considered that, but again, all things are up for discussion, but the ones that I saw, the facade does not match the existing architecture really at all. So I would think that would be a hard sell.
This is just a fence.
Should we mention
But it was
marijuana
like a brick-
dispensary?
It was like a brick fence setup, just like concrete.
and the concrete, and it doesn't show detail here, but it's a stamp, so it looks like there's stones in there. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we may have to re-enter that as an option. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
So if you went back to the option of tearing it down, then would you need that whole space or what would go there?
Okay, so in the perfect world that we had originally imagined, we would build the whole substation on those 3 properties
Oh, and get rid of. this
and then
whole-
get rid of that. Yeah, and we would extend the circuits over to that area, and so then, right,
alley wedge.
and that would actually make the process of the project, the construction, a lot faster and smoother, because you can just build the equipment all at once and then start transferring the circuits over to the new equipment.
Did they completely give up on the bank across the street?
Uh,
And how much would it cost to run 1,000 feet of
Yeah.
high voltage cable?
Yeah, didn't pursue that after our folks said we'd really rather work on this site. I mean, we could revisit that.
What if it was just the parking lot, like that extra parking lot?
Well, that's what I was looking at, just the parking lot, because the other side is, well, it's got the building on it, and there's not a whole lot of space over on the other side.
And what I would say is,
I think so. It's about the same size as the 3 properties.
and so here's the thing about that, right? We can pursue that. It's a private really transaction though. And so while we do that, these properties will still be in our ownership and still be as they are. I mean, we will maintain them better than we have in the past. And again, we apologize for that disruption, right? And the continued disruption, to your point. But when Ameren purchased these properties, we purchased them with the intent to do something that we then found out we couldn't do. Shame on us for not doing that research, right? But what we're not is real, residential property maintenance. Like that's just not our strength. And so we're really out of our depth here in doing this. And unfortunately, we're learning with you as we do that, and that's disruptive. I think we've got a handle on that at this point. I mean, the feedback has been the squatters aren't there. It's not pretty, but it's not a complete disaster. Fair
So
enough to
you
say.
guys, let's just say that you guys actually reevaluated the situation and were able to balance on this track. The rest, if it's not news, you guys consider like letting us do like a garden or something like that.
There was a question in the chat as I quickly try to get these photos up. That's okay. That's why I got elected. To do the navigation. So a question was, what would the plans be if this new substation goes in? What would the plans be for the old substation, the land that it sits on? Can you speak to that at all, or?
Once the old substation is
Yeah.
and the area cleaned up, then it would be offered for sale.
Yeah, we
Okay.
vacated.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't know, because it's that weird sort of wedge between the 2 alleys, like it's not really
That might be the spot
viable
for your
space,
That
but
would
yeah,
be a good idea for something.
that could be
But that seems like
That
I
much
I just have a question.
units
Okay,
take up
1
that
second.
whole yard.
about space.
Oh, you mean those 2?
Yeah, those 2 units, they take up the whole yard. They're kind of far away from the other one.
Yeah.
Why can't you put them in the park where you're vacating the alley?
Do they have to be that far away
Or do
from?
they have to?
So they don't have to be exactly like that. We put the equipment there to show, here's all. We can kind of move it around, but the substation maintenance folks need to have a lane that they can drive through the substation. Like if they have to or they'll typically bring a flatbed in there,
They
offload
would
it.
want closer to their units, other units, existing units. They could put a driveway and a parking spaces behind there.
Yeah.
I can't hear a word you say.
They gotta be able to get their able to maintain that.
Right, if we're just saying that they need that room.
So there may be,
Maybe you could create
The feature is.
another little alley there that,
Yeah.
that you can get the parking. In other words, where you, along this fence line.
These are gonna be new and improved units put in, right?
Right.
But basically, knock on wood, you're not gonna need a lot of maintenance. And you won't need a lot of drive space back
Well,
there.
they
Do you know how heavy is that?
They're relevant, they're native.
Yeah.
They're-
so I think the point is there may be wiggle room on space, but the general scale of
Not
what we're proposing here is probably true. But there could be some give on
But they
that,
put
the
the
back.
drive in there, in the power station on the other side of these units, the yard side, and move the units closer to the existing units, and the drive that you need on the other side of the new units.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I understand the drive there. So,
I think we probably reacted to where the alley is and where a natural fit seemed to be for the curb cut to get that kind of straight drive through
right.
that you see,
It's like
but
you could move those two units closer to the other one and put in a drive at the back of them that would both serve the purposes of the houses on one side and your unit.
Yeah, I think that's
eliminate the parking.
That's what.
Right.
That's, the parking issue becomes an issue because you're talking about 8 units. There's still 8 parking spots if you could park on the street.
right.
And if you've ever tried to park there, if you happen to be going the wrong, it's hard to park there.
Yeah, you
No matter
got
what.
But
leverage
you've got to
across
bring
the
somebody behind
street.
it, so that's to protect those
You got
properties. so you can-
leverage far across the street and another place at the corner if they were putting in. And parking just killer there, especially on the weekend.
Right.
There is a business
Well,
going in.
Are you taking a note on that?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do you need, sure, I've got.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, we could move the equipment around a little bit to allow for more parking there. And then maybe Ameren,
All the space.
yeah, and then maybe Ameren could, create an easement that says, hey, if we give you a couple of days' notice, we're gonna need you to vacate so we can bring equipment in there to.
Right,
Yeah.
if you created, just an alley with an easement for Ameren, and it would be an alley there, you would be able to access parking. They need parking more than they need a little bit of grass.
Right.
And most of the people that are gonna live there probably.
They can come up from the other side of the alley too.
And speaking of alleys, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Someone on the Zoom had a question about what about trash with the alley redirect? And while I can't speak to urban development or whatnot, I don't believe that it would cause an issue of refuse trucks getting through the alley with this current redirect because with the 2 garages that are sort of somewhat adjacent here, they wouldn't put a dumpster there. So they're not going to place a dumpster where the refuse truck can't get access to it.
How are they gonna get their trash? They're gonna,
Yes, it was 2.
where would they walk to go? They have to go all the way around here to throw their trash away? You guys are assuming we can even get people to buy that building and rent it and restore it. Like, let's not put the horse where the cart in front of the horse.
Right, so we had a very, very brief conversation with the guy that, I can't remember his name, the guy that was in the refuse department.
Randy
And-
Breitenfeld?
What was his last name?
I think it was a refuse guy and there's a building inspector there. I don't
Okay,
remember.
so-
who it was, yeah.
So the answer was they would put the dumpsters along Mac Road instead of the alley adjacent to that four family.
You'll put dumpsters in front
And
of the
more
bar.
parking spots. Yeah.
There's a bar right across the street.
But then
So
the
you're gonna
restaurant's
put
going
dumpsters
in on
right
the
in
lawn.
front of the bar. So where people do park.
Yeah. So that's a good
Parking
point.
right there to go to the bar, when you put dumpsters, it's not gonna leave no space.
Yeah.
And then it's gonna trash and make it look bad.
So that's a good point. You can also do roll carts, right? So I lived in a 4-family apartment building that had roll carts. It's on the side of the house, and until the Monday or the Wednesday you got to put it out, you put it out, you pull it back in. So it could be a roll cart. I wouldn't want a dumpster on my street either, so that's a fair point.
But you're gonna be dealing with runners too, they're not, sometimes it's friendly at home. Right, everybody walks dogs, jogs, up and down that.
And so I would also say, like, this is our proposal that is required, requires your buy-in, the alderman's buy-in, because this would be part of a vacation. But it also would need to be vetted and approved by city streets and everything else. So this is kind of first start, like what can we live with together? And then we need to go follow up and have those more logistical conversations with the city. But that's a fair point about the dumpsters on the street.
So if we,
Don't love it.
if we created that alley, then that would make it more accessible for the dumpsters, and it would be more like what they're used to.
I think that's yeah, so that's actually there and kind of perceived now is staying. Again, knowing that we heard a concern about parking, knowing that 2 spaces, definitely not 8 spaces, but better than nothing.
So there are at least 2 that would currently.
But I think going back and trying to think about a different orientation to allow for maybe parking spots on the other side, here, opposed to where we're at, like, that's a good note, something we need to take back.
And part of it is, I think one of the greatest issues is that we're trying to fit a modern substation in a 100-year-old subdivision, so it does become a game. And it's not just in Princeton Heights, it's not just with this location, it's all across the city. I mean, for heaven's sake, there's parts of the city that still have wooden water pipes, so I just want to acknowledge that presents the greatest challenge in trying to sort of fit modern infrastructure within a densely populated area in a way that's unobtrusive, in a way that doesn't do away with parking or disrupt refuse collection, and so on and so forth. So how do we implement necessary infrastructure updates? Because again, with this modern substation, we would not have had a 12-hour power outage due to the situation that caused it by any means. I mean, one entire transformer could fail and the other could pick up the slack in the time that it, for the duration of the time needed to repair the failed station, rather the failed transformer. So I just sort of want to acknowledge that the overarching difficulty is fitting it within the densely populated area as it is. And again, that is not just Princeton Heights, that's Boulevard Heights, that's South City, that's North City. Though I suspect North City might be somewhat easier to work around.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Something
But
Would it be perhaps enlightening to have the opinion of a couple of developers? If you were going to restore this property, what would you do? And then maybe you have more concrete information.
Or see what they're willing to sell it for, and see who's willing to buy it, and see if there's even a market for it.
Well,
Not revalue the property and tear it down.
so to the property selling front, I have been receiving phone calls from individuals who are very interested in purchasing the properties. I have nothing to do with that. That is so far outside of my bailiwick. I do not assist Ameren in their purchasing or selling, but there is absolutely an interest from people who want to go in and they want to renovate them. And for some developers that I've spoken with,
Everybody's interested, but whoever's gonna pony up the cash and do it, that's a whole nother ball.
oh, absolutely. But a lot of people see it that I've spoken with. Again, I can't speak for real estate as a sector by any means, but several people I've spoken with are see it as an opportunity because it's really sort of, there's no demolition needed on the interior. It's sort of a blank slate as it currently stands. So any major internal infrastructure updates would be easier to accomplish at the moment. So they're actually saving money in the long run because they're not having to, say, I don't know, reroute an entire bathroom or whatnot. I don't know what the state of the inside looks like,
I
but
understand that. I'm just saying, interest and money are two very, very different things.
oh, absolutely.
I'm interested but
Mhm.
hopes and dreams and what ifs doesn't really help us right now.
That's a fair point. And I mean, so we know that the real estate market right now is insane. People are paying I would
30%.
over asking price.
Yeah.
So interest and demand, we know it exists. I think secondarily around parking. So I mentioned my own apartment where I had the roll cart in Forest Park Southeast of the Grove. My backyard was this backyard. It was the creamery that's on Sarah and Papin, and the entire backyard was brick. If there was a little bit of grass, but it was basically a cove. I had an industrial operation right behind me. It's not a substation, but it was a very active creamery business. And so as a renter, I mean, you're moving into the neighborhood. The apartment would be new, updated. It's interesting. You know, you got a lot going on in the neighborhood. Our properties was standing. And so once those things are brought back online, I have no doubt that you're going to have an interested group of at least 16 new neighbors that would want to move into this space.
I'm more worried about the money that you invest in buy it.
Bev, you've had your hand up for a moment. I'm sorry.
First of all, the people that were interested in buying the property are not going to be favorable as far as purchasing on.
It's one buyer, fair, but that's just one buyer.
But when you look at the picture, how is the second, third properties from the corner going to deal with the trash? It's going to have to go out in front.
So that's what we were talking about over here. Yeah,
Right, so
Which would be a problem
for parking.
for not only parking, the trash men and all that, because this is,
The narrow street.
this Lockboro, this stretch of Lockboro, that's where the bus stop comes for the kids in the morning and stuff. So you're gonna have children getting on the bus, getting off the bus, and everything else. You're gonna have situation with the trash. How do you carry up groceries, furniture, any of that stuff when you don't have a place to park in front? You don't have any alternative in back.
Right, so the point that the gentleman over here made was, hey, can we scoot those two
Right.
high voltage units closer to the rest of the units? And then create your alley behind them instead of in front, and then that becomes your lane. It's kind of not probably gonna be as big as an alley, but that's your route in. And then instead of having grass there, you have angular parking, and your dumpsters can go there as well. Does that make sense?
I don't think the space is gonna work. But my other question is, have you done any measurements and seen what that back parking lot to the bank?
No.
Would it hold all this?
Well, what I did was square footage measurements, and it was, you know, length width measurements. And it was very similar to, actually, I think it was a little bigger than this.
And that's the back lot of the bank.
Yeah,
Okay.
but again,
How many
we
square
have,
feet do you need?
what's that?
How many square feet do you need?
I don't remember the number. What our substation folks normally tell us is, we would like 2 acres, we can make it work with 1. Those 3 properties are maybe not, it's a little bigger than a quarter acre, and they can make that work. Okay, so how much do I need? I don't have a square footage measurement. What I did was I said, okay, went on Google Earth, and I measured this way and I measured that way, and I compared it to the other one. I want to say the parking lot at the bank was a little bigger, but again, we haven't even approached the owners of that. So, and we don't know whether Bank of America is actually going to sell that.
Abandon that alley.
That's a separate
No,
piece.
we won't. Like, there, I mean, there's a lot of like commercial properties that use that alleyway behind, so.
You mean in
No
full?
parking.
Yeah.
Like, it's already maxed out. There's parking, there's commercial trucks that go up and down there.
Both alleys.
Oh, they made it their one way, right? I think here. It goes down.
Oh, that,
Oh,
yeah.
I thought you were
that would
talking,
require
okay.
the alley closed.
I thought you were talking about the Macklin Alley. We were gonna have a problem with commercial vehicle. I was like, what do you mean commercial?
Yeah, we wouldn't have to close that out.
Okay.
That all things considered, by you on that corner, it's a very congested corner, the first one already. And if it's all already difficult for people to find parking places in that area. Going down the, mobile park, one, there's a long parking one side. Unless they change it to and parking side. So what's gonna happen in large changes is that corner is gonna become more dangerous. There's all so much going on.
More congested.
More people living there, more cars. So I just wonder if it's not a better option from a location point and for Ameren. We can't consider the other options being more feasible. Now, does it cost more? Well, how much more? And is it worth it? Because that extra money you spend is going to improve this neighborhood if this was removed. Because this apartment building, that they would have parking space. The business building in front would have parking. You know, and it would be more beautified.
If they tore them down, people would have parking space, you'd actually lessen the population.
It's not,
The city may let them if it doesn't bring down.
not enough space for Ameren. One at a time, and it's not enough space for the apartment. Everybody's going to suffer. You know what I'm saying? And this is already kind of congested, and it's a dangerous corner of how it's constructed. We have to really watch it on the inside. That's how the street comes out. Really, I think we should give consideration for another location and consider if the extra money invested is worth the future use for everybody to consider.
I think it's a fair point, and you know, I'm hearing two takeaways here for us at this point, and there could be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 by the time we get out of here, but two that have bubbled up at this point are the consideration of space utilization, and can we condense the site, create alternative sort of drive space that is also potentially able to make space for parking behind those buildings. And then the second is a follow-up on the alternative site and just see what that due diligence is or could be. It's a longer process, and so I want to be honest about that. But I think, given your interest, it's necessary to come back with more information.
Looking at clean space there, if you're sort of like looking at those buildings, it's going to be easier to build on clean space than try to build on this space and still provide electricity to the neighborhood.
Right. So I want to throw this out there again. Based on what I'm hearing about parking, would removing the buildings help that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? I heard no and I heard yes. And I heard
Well,
we don't want to do it.
okay, hold on now, hold on. Again, you'd have to get the city.
Right. Well,
Part of the city's opposition, to be fair, was that was going to be strong opposition from the alderman was against it and the neighborhood was against it.
Okay, hold on now, everyone, hold on. I almost need a little gavel. No, just kidding. So there have been a few comments in the Zoom chat to that effect as well. Can we just remove the buildings, like if we get a petition or so on and so forth? And I mean, I honestly can't speak to another division's, especially a division within the executive branch's decision on why they declined to allow them to be demolished, and if they're willing to change that or based on the information or so on and so forth. So, I mean, we can absolutely, I can absolutely organize a petition process or host additional forums just for, what do we want to do with these 3 buildings? Do we want them to be sold? Do we want them to be torn down as originally planned, so on and so forth? I think Ameren has demonstrated, not just in these plans, but in other places in the city, like you mentioned, that they're able to essentially hide the building or sort of camouflage it, if you will, within a residential space. But for all intents and purposes at the moment, the city is not allowing for the demolition. So we can have that conversation. I'm happy to facilitate that, but that's just sort of where I understand the city to be, the executive branch to be at the moment. Let me, as a legislator, step back from that. But
yeah, so the key there would be to show that the neighborhood sees it as a benefit to not have those houses there. We can't get it approved in the fact that it's they're derelict houses. I mean, at the moment, maybe they are, but I think that they could be restored to.
But if we're going off of property values, they don't go off of what it could be, they go off of what it is now.
Understood.
And again, and you asked earlier, and then I do need to start, I mean, this gentleman's had his hand up for 10 minutes, and I'm sorry, sir, but, you know, I can, with Ameren's permission, I could get a city inspector to go out and get a sort of assessment, or we can do a walkthrough, or, you know, I can absolutely work with Ameren to get an idea. I will say, property values in 2020 in Ward 12 across the entire ward went up nearly 10%, and that's during a pandemic. So we're not hurting in terms of property value, and I'm sure everyone feels that in their property taxes that just went up too. If you have any concerns about that, we can talk about that as well. You can do an appeal, but we can work to address that. But the city has to take a much more comprehensive view of it, and it's where the public support's going to have to come in to really nudge that, sort of push the needle on that. And then you, sir, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. You're talking about moving the substation south towards buildings. Why don't we go west and down the alley? It's easier to widen the alley and knock down a garage if you need to. You can go west down the alley. If you need a square footage. It'd be a lot easier. You got an open alley. You don't have to knock nothing down. You still got your alley for trash pickup. You still got your.
Yeah.
Too narrow, you can't do anything.
I said you can widen the alley, not down.
Yeah, but if we took out garages, people would be coming to knock me down.
Right.
People would not. Yeah. And
I have a question.
yes, ma'am.
Now, are you lumping all three of those houses, that you have to do the same thing with all of them? Or can you just, for instance, demolish just the apartment building on the corner? And then you eliminate all the problem with parking, and you can have more space over that way if the apartment building isn't there.
Okay, that's actually a really good question, because it allows me to speak to how the city looks at maps, right? And we don't look at maps such as this that demonstrate the actual houses. We look at maps of parcels. So your property is what we would call a parcel, and that's your plot of land, that's your parcel. And so the city views it as there are 3 adjacent parcels, 1, 2, 3, and sort of how Ameren wants to affect or alter the parcels. So I don't know.
We looked at, I mean,
Just a single, yeah.
Once the conversation with Dan Krasnoff, who is, by the way, no longer with the city as a cultural resources director, so I think there's a vacancy with the director right now. Our proposal was all 3, and I think we wanted more than that originally, but we ended up purchasing 3, and the demolition was denied for all 3. And the conversation we had went such a way that it wasn't denied. We rescinded our permit for demolition because it was going to be denied. So I don't think we ever just looked at a 1 building alternative because we were already told that knocking them down wasn't an option. But if that is again an option, I mean, we can think about it, right? It's Tetris, but we can think about it, right?
I guess if knocking them down was an option, you wouldn't be here.
Sure, but maybe 1 building's different than 3.
Yeah, and I haven't thought of that, so I appreciate you asking that, ma'am.
Well, yeah, because I live on Shomar, and there used to be a lot of problems with that apartment building. People, well, there used to be a lot of problems
With
that
the-
building.
With the one on the corner?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I haven't had any complaints on. But
That-
Princeton Heights works to work with, okay? The thing is, don't get me wrong, but you see a precedence that you set here for the utility to come in to purchase property, do that, and then end up getting what they want because the property looks like it is.
Yeah, and so we want to be clear, that's not what we're trying to do. And to her point, and I used to work in the mayor's office for 10 years. And so I'm very familiar with, I was on the planning commission, and so I'm very familiar with the demo process. The statute, the ordinance does not allow for demolition by neglect, which is to say you bought a building, you let it turn to crap, and then it became a public safety hazard, and then we let you knock it down after we told you you couldn't. So they will not allow us, and I agree with you, and Ameren doesn't want to participate in that sort of precedent setting where we buy it, we become a bad neighbor, we annoy you to the point where you say, please just knock this thing down already, and then we just go do what we wanted to do anyway. So I think we don't want to set that.
Right.
That's where we're at, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But the thing is, I think it would be well received if you looked into property, the parking lot. See if you go from there and start.
It's not gonna be well received at all if you shut down that alleyway. I can tell you that right now. It's not.
And I just want to make sure I'm clear, which alley are we talking about?
the one that we're talking
Bank?
about.
Parking lot. with that.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if that was part of the proposal.
Yeah, no.
They already
We
said
wouldn't,
it.
we wouldn't close that one. We wouldn't close that one. It's just the one between the existing substation and the properties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, right across the street, we've got a new building over there, and they've got the bar in there, and they've just gotten a restaurant for on their spot, so the parking is gonna be done, especially with the limited parking in front.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when she asked that question, in my head, what I could see is if we took down this last building on the corner, this picture very well, then we could put the equipment on that side, maybe we could keep the alley open. And so you keep the alley open, you keep the existing parking, but then you get rid of the tenants that would add to the parking problem.
Yeah, but that's gonna create a lot of problems as far as that intersection.
Oh, having that subsidy, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it
Because-
depends on how it's structured, right? For you, you're talking visibility wise, right? Which is why you got rid of some of those, the
Yeah.
past parking
That
spaces.
and the,
Could we
there's
solve
always
that with,
one.
could we solve that with setting the equipment back? Like,
You
you
can
can
have
have
an
it
building, you know, like the building is fairly close to the sidewalk. You know,
Yeah, there's not a ton of
above
setback
ground.
there.
right,
So there's no visibility there now, anyway, so I don't think you would be any worse.
But
Yeah.
And consider that streets has to sign off on this, refuse has to sign off on this. I don't know about water department. This alleyway redirect wouldn't involve.
All the utilities would have to sign off on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, because there's.
With Spire?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Everybody's got to say it causes no harm to their operation. Yes, ma'am.
Cultural resource office.
You said, did I talk to
All from the cultural resource office.
Dan Krasnoff?
No,
Oh, the new Jan,
I forgot her name.
Jan Cameron.
Yeah.
I have not spoken to her about this yet, no.
She was gonna check those,
And check in on what?
on what Dan had started.
Oh, got it,
The whole
got it,
situation.
got it. I'm sure he left good notes for her, but between the three of us, we can give her the whole picture, I'm sure.
I like the bank option.
It's a lot more space.
It's a little bit more space.
Just a little.
I don't remember the numbers, so I can't say, oh, yeah, it's a lot. It was very similar, but slightly larger.
Well,
So-
it would be good for our neighborhood, I think, in at least one building, take down the apartment building, that would eliminate 8 parking spaces. But also it helps that one of the businesses on the corner, that really nice restaurants there, that people don't go, there's no place to park. So it would contribute to business on that. And lot of the investors in that is for people comment, because there's no parking. So it does affect life in the community that way. If there was more, you open up more options for parking. Maybe there was a restaurant that frequently have, they don't get parking.
Onesto. Yeah, because they take my parking. And plus, you would still have the stretch of Mackland to park either side on as well. So that might just be working with the businesses to try and encourage customers to park along Mackland instead of trying to park on Loughborough. And
Oh, yeah.
Because on the other side of the alley from the bar, there's residents.
oh, that's true. That are Mackland facing. Because I was thinking along.
If we were so worried about the parking, why did we take some of the parking? I understand it's a highway, but why did we take some of the parking in front of QT? I mean, that is a horrible intersection now, but they put those flags up that they can't park in front of QT. That is a dangerous intersection that somebody's gonna get killed on. Because we took the parking on that one side and now it's.
Or Kings Highway, gravel.
No, it's gravel, it's right down. it's
Gravel and
past
Loughborough?
Where the QT is.
Yeah, yeah.
They put poles up, so they can't.
So now none of the trucks, for like Homer Supply and like some of the areas, can park on across the street, which wasn't hurting anything. They took the parking in. Now, somebody's gonna get killed pulling out of that street because you can't see past any of the cars, you can't see past any of the trucks.
The
So we were
parking.
that concerned about parking.
That, the state had to approve that, because that's.
That's a state highway.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if we're concerned about parking in a dangerous intersection.
Sir, it looked like you had a question.
What about the cemetery spot that you were talking about? That would get us all.
Yeah, that was
all
about 6/10 of a mile away, and that was super expensive.
Maybe not. Oh, Jesus.
It was gonna be super expensive to, I mean, like millions, to route that power out, and then you might even have to make the substation larger because of the efficiency losses you have in running cables back to
So
the.
anywhere that you're gonna move other than where it is, or you have to do that underground, is that the idea, or? That's the way that goes?
Some of it would be underground,
So you have to be able to go down the streets or whatever.
right?
Which
Just curious.
would mean any street paving projects I've got planned are going to immediately be put on hold because I'm not going to pay $80,000 to repave a street only for it to be torn up.
And the good
So-
news there is that Ameren didn't pay for that restoration.
Well, even
Well, I mean,
even
so,
still.
so my point is wait for us to do the work. And
Yeah.
then we would have to restore the street.
Yeah, but what I mean to sort of and humorously illustrate is a relocation of that sort of now to the Bank of America. I don't think that would affect any ongoing projects, but to say the cemetery, oh, okay. Now I understand. I'm so sorry. I couldn't place it. But to relocate it from where it is now all the way to like the cemetery, that's going to affect capital improvement projects we've got planned. So, which, I mean, if we need to interrupt a capital improvement project, we'll interrupt that project.
Well,
but-
those people there would be polite.
Well, yeah, they, you might be setting up for a sort of zombie movie, you know, sort of perfect. Yeah, they'll be great neighbors.
So it looks like people are
Yeah.
restless. What's the best way
So,
to next step this in your mind?
oh, that's a good question.
I mean, I certainly have three pieces to follow up, right? Like there's the space question, there's the bank question, and
Space.
what was the third one?
Parking?
Maybe I made that up, but maybe it's just alternative site due diligence. I think we know on the cemetery, like it's kind of costed out of our realm of possibility.
And the sort of economic potential of the three properties.
The third opportunity was alternative site design in general, which is perhaps one building demolished versus three.
Sharon, right, if you like.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right, so, but the case you have to make is that tearing down the building is a benefit to the community in that it's gonna allow you to continue to have parking along the
and it
alleys.
would be the case we would make, right? Because that's the best if we went that route, it would
Yeah.
need to be because we agreed and then we agreed together with Culture Resources
Mhm.
as a compromise. But
We had a 12-hour power outage a day before we were forecasted to have 102-degree weather in a neighborhood that is predominantly over the age of 70.
Yeah.
I will make that case.
Right.
I will make a case that it is a public health concern. I mean, Bev can speak to my texting her at midnight, trying to organize emergency cooling shelters.
I mean,
at
and the
my
mayor's office
personal
called that
expense,
morning,
So,
and said, hey, what's up?
yes, yeah, and the mayor's office was also in tune. So there,
It was-
and that's why this is prime opportunity to discuss it and have these conversations, because we very, very narrowly avoided, thanks to Ameren's due diligence and their promptness in responding. But we very narrowly avoided an emergency situation in the ward 2 weeks ago with the forecast showing 102-degree Fahrenheit. 102 degrees on the thermostat means that it feels like 110 with the humidity. I mean, we were under a severe heat warning. And in a ward that's predominantly elderly, retired, 75 plus, I mean, across my street, I've got Miss Mary or Granny Finkman. She doesn't mind being called Granny Finkman, I've checked, who's in her late 80s, so that a failing substation, and it's not failing, but it's not, I mean, we're talking about a Theseus's ship of a substation. It's over 60 years old. It's wildly inefficient compared to modern technology. And it does pose, I mean, with the outdated maintenance, or rather the methods of maintenance that are now outdated or could be outdated, absolutely poses a public health concern.
And you have the businesses that have been cornerstones of this community for over 40 years.
Yes,
that were
Onesto
trying to do
lost.
business, And then
Mhm.
we got shut down, and we pay higher taxes. We employ people from this neighborhood,
Mhm.
and it shut us down.
Where are you?
There's
Your
3
business?
people on my block on Schumer
Mhm.
that are on oxygen at night and during the day.
Mhm.
And without the power, they had, one of them sat out in the car.
Yeah.
So that he had air conditioning and they could plug in his oxygen thing there. But, I mean, it was really a problem for that 10 hours overnight.
Yeah. Completely understood, yeah. And one note, and this is something that's important in general. So Ameren has a emergency medical equipment registry, and if you see those residents and you would encourage them to please sign up for that registry, it gives us better insight into the kind of emergency medical equipment that's in any area during an outage. Which, not to say, well, we try to prioritize places that we have health risks like that. So it's good. It's an additional data set for us to have.
Is that a separate phone number or something that you contact?
There is, and Alderman, I can send it to you. It's right on if you go to our website, there's a phone number there on our customer service page at the bottom. And it just says Ameren's Emergency Medical Registry.
Otherwise, you can't get through.
So if you scroll down, it's down there.
There we go.
Right there.
I just pulled it up, the medical equipment registry. So if anyone wants to grab that number so that their neighbors or themselves can register, I'll give everyone a second to get out their pens. And I've got business cards if anyone wants, by the way. Zoom, we are winding down. This is just sort of the end moments. I'll keep it going for public reporting purposes, but you don't need to stick around if you don't want. Thank you for joining. So is everyone ready? Okay. So the medical equipment registry, in order for us to be aware of customers who use electrically operated medical equipment, a doctor's verification must be recorded on our medical equipment registry, which allows us to notify customers about planned maintenance outages. Customers should also have a backup plan in place for emergency outages. That registry number is as follows, 800-552-7583. And that is the Ameren Missouri Medical Equipment Registry.
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. I had it right here. See, it's just a bunch of reference questions, just like the library. Let me just Google it.
For emergency, other question considered, how would emergency vehicles get in there for fire trucks? Emergency
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be from the front.
The cars parked on that street. How they would do that.
Well,
Sounds to me like there's cars parked in the alley too, right?
I don't know what.
It's a tight fit either way.
yeah, and the fire department's not gonna say, oh no, there's a car here, what can we do? The fire department's gonna say,
We'll move
there's a
it.
fire. Yeah, there's a fire and we're gonna take care of it.
When they drink, I noticed.
Yeah, yeah. So, Ameren and myself, and I will say that Ameren's been very responsive in catching me up to date. Again, this spans 3 aldermen in Ward 12.
Third one's a charm.
Yeah, oh, thank you.
My phone call,
Sorry?
and he put up with my phone.
Yeah,
call.
yeah.
Fun call. I mean,
Fun
and a
call.
necessary call, right? We had to get on the same page. So appreciate you reaching out.
Mhm.
I appreciate it.
But we're gonna keep working on these aforementioned items, the space, looking at the bank as a potential relocation site, which is currently contingent on if Bank of America even wants to sell. We don't know. Or, I mean, at least they're not telling the legislative branch, I'll tell you that. City Hall is not known for its internal communication. Alternate demolition plans, such as taking out that corner, taking out one parcel instead of all 3 parcels. I did receive some requests on the Zoom chat, as well as from this group, to perhaps do a petition or do like a block survey.
About demolition in general. Or
I think
Yeah, about demolition in general.
check with multiple reports officers.
I would have to, I'd have to run it by them first. Because as they're the executive branch, I as a legislator do not have power over them. Now I've got influence, right? I can say, I spoke with my neighbors. They're really okay with this building going. They do take that into account, but I can't tell the cultural division or the cultural resource center, like, hey, I'm the alderman and I want these buildings gone. Cause they'll say, that's very nice, alderman.
that's not how government works.
Go back to your chambers. So yeah, that's definitely not how government
That
works.
is not how good government works.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, and really it boils down to, we're trying to fit a modern substation that has to go in. We need a modern substation, right? We're trying to fit it within pre-existing infrastructure that we really can't alter or change too drastically. And a demolition is a pretty drastic change, it changes the entire footprint of that plot. In fact, they would have to anyway.
We have to do some subdividing.
Yeah, there's a lot of city hall
Yeah. A lot of
paperwork that goes
bureaucracy.
into that. A lot of bureaucracy is a good way to put it. So we're gonna get an update on that, and I will order more stationery so I can send out follow-up letters to everyone. And otherwise, unless there's any final comments, I think we came in right at an hour and a half. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you for your patience and your due diligence.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.